Welcome to Manager Tools. Today's show, do not give feedback to your boss. I say that again. Do not give feedback to your boss. Here we go. Okay, I think that's the first time I've ever said in the introduction to the cast, the title of it, twice.
I say again. I think you said I say again, right?
I say, do not give feedback to your boss. When we get to feedback at our conferences, this is the most frequently asked question.
Yeah.
Like, there might be other questions, but everybody is just dying. They hear the feedback model and they're immediately thinking, I can give my boss feedback now.
I actually think, let me put it this way. I don't know that it's the most frequent. Well, it is. It is.
Of course it is.
But there's something else that goes with it being the most frequently asked question. The change in the audience when the one person asks it is noticeable. You know, when you present a lot,
like E.F. Hutton, talking.
Everyone, I mean, there are some questions that people want to know the answer to, and some people do, and they ask the question, and it's helpful. You don't have to cover it because you know somebody's going to ask. This question, when people ask, it's as if everyone goes, aha, I wasn't going to ask, but that's the question I wanted to know. There's a physical change in the aura of the room when it happens. No question. Yeah.
And our answer is always the same. Hundreds of times. We've been asked a question hundreds of times, and our answer is always the same. And people don't like it. That's one of the things they don't like. They don't like the answer.
And we could talk a lot about why they don't like it. I have my thoughts. I will say that it surprises me. I sometimes say, you've seen me say, okay, we knew it was coming. Here it is. Let's talk about it. Let's be open about it. And I asked the group, I said, raise your hand if you've listened to a couple of hundred, 300 or 400 of the cast, right? And there are always one or two guys that have listened. And usually there's one or two people in the audience that have listened to every single cast. And I say, hey, look, we have a long track record of being totally blatantly clear about this particular topic. What is our theme? And there are times when people say, I'm not really sure. I'm stunned that there are people who are listening right now that think that this cast is unnecessary.
Yes.
Because we've said it so many times.
Right.
But we've never really expanded upon it, really explicated it as well. And that's what we want to do. And I realized the other day, I started getting ready to write a cast, and I thought, my gosh, we don't have a cast saying explicitly, you do not give feedback to your boss.
Yeah. So we've said it hundreds of times. It's the same answer every single time. So let's be clear.
Sure
let's just nail this thing. And if you have any doubts about why we say what we do, you'll have no doubts at the end of this. We'll go through a really interesting thought exercise that will make this perfectly clear.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that now anybody who says listen to every cast has to say, yeah, there's a cast for that. Or when somebody asks, there'll be one person in the room that goes, oh, I can't believe they're wasting their time asking that question. Can I get feedback to my boss? How can I use this with my boss? Because they'll be like, I know that answer because they did a cast for that, because Manager Tools has trademarked the phrase, there's a cast for that, right? Yeah. Okay.
So what's the outline? What are we going to talk about today specifically around this topic?
So first of all, you never give feedback. And when we say feedback, guys, just to be clear, we mean Manager Tools feedback in the feedback model. You never give feedback to your boss, ever, 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 ever. I will never say that you give feedback to your boss. This is Manager Tools. It's not Direct Tools. Okay? Don't use our model because it's not Direct Tools. It's Manager Tools. Don't believe it, folks, when they say it's okay. It's a trap.
Yeah, but my boss says
it's a trap.
I can give him
my
feedback.
boss says he's open to it.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk about that.
Weren't you the guy half an hour ago that was asking, what do you do about a really mean boss? Yeah, trust me, he doesn't mean what he's saying there. And then we do want to talk for just a minute at the end about our guidance about 360-degree review guidance and start, stop, and continue, which address the issues of getting feedback from your subordinates and how do you deal with that? Or could I give feedback to my boss in a 360, those kinds of things. Because they relate to this whole issue of performance communications up, down, and sideways in an organization.
Okay, so hopefully folks by now have heard our first point. You never give feedback to your boss.
Yeah.
And look, we're a little bit strident about this, right?
Yeah.
And I think, Mark, in the past you've gotten on your soapbox. This is one of those things you get on your soapbox about because we've seen so many people get hurt by this.
Yeah.
And we just can't.
I think that, first of all, there's all kinds of reasons why people believe it could be possible. One of the reasons is, fairness and equality and egalitarianism. Well, if he can give me feedback, I can give him feedback. Well, No, if fairness and equality and egalitarianism is the case, then when a police officer pulls you over and you're drunk and he puts you in handcuffs, you should be able to pull him over anytime you want and put him in handcuffs, right? I mean, there's role power there that affects the issue of fairness. The other thing, too, I've said this to some people, and some people dismiss it, but I still believe it's true, is that when people have been struggling to talk about performance, they don't have a way to talk about performance, communicate about performance, and then you give them the model, and they try it, and they're like, wow, that works great. They want to extend the model to other targets. They say, I finally know how to do it, and when I talk to a direct of mine, I come across so sincerely, and it's so easy. Why couldn't I do this to my boss?
Why couldn't I use it with my boss, or why couldn't I use it with my wife, or
spouse?
Right, and so they want to extend some. And that's understandable. Something you're successful with something, and you want to expand, but that's not.
And I think something else too. I think there's a lot of people listening right now that think that it's only newer professionals that are asking how to give feedback to their bosses. Right. But folks, that's not true. Plenty of experienced managers, executives even, ask us how to use the Manager Tools feedback model to tell their bosses how they feel. And again, I think that's partially a function of their belief in the model. They hear it, they realize it solves their concern about what words do I say? How can I say it in just a way that will help people hear what I want them to hear without creating too much conflict. And basically people say, I know the words now. I have a less of a hurdle to go over. And so I only have one hurdle left.
Just because it's easier though doesn't mean it's a good idea, right? I mean,
exactly. Look, giving feedback to your boss is not a good idea. It's just not. And again, guys, remember our guidance is built for 90% of the managers 90% of the time. You could easily write us and say, my boss says it's okay, and I've actually given him feedback in the model, and he actually said thank you, and he actually changed what he did, and he didn't punish me. Well, okay, enjoy that while you got it, because you live in a little nirvana right there with that boss, and if he's your first boss or she's your first boss, and she's doing that or he's doing that, if you take that to your next boss, you are playing Russian roulette with 5 chambers filled with bullets, my friend, because the next boss, we promise you, will not be so kind. Yeah. We roll the dice on that one. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And look, there's no fairness issue to be considered here in terms of, well, if I give feedback or if my boss gives me feedback, then somehow by fairness rules, I should be able to give her feedback. Newton's second law really doesn't apply to social interactions that involve role power. They don't. I mean, to every action, there's an equal opposite reaction is not true. It doesn't make sense.
It is absolutely true. There is, if you give feedback to your boss, that action will
equal an opposite reaction. Yes. Yeah.
You might be going out.
Actually, it's probably not opposite, right? It's multiplied.
It's probably not equal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't get to give feedback to your boss just because she gives it to you. It's true in the same way that your CEO doesn't read your emails if you send him an email. But if he sends you one, you read his. Now, fairness would say that, well, CEO sends out these broadcast emails. I have to read them. I read them. So therefore, by definition and fairness, he would read mine. I'm sorry, folks. He ain't reading them. And if your CEO publishes his email address and it's a fairly large public company, somebody else is reading that email. And 90% of them are being trashed.
Yeah.
And you're getting a standard response. Thanks for writing me. I appreciate your input.
Yeah. There's a power structure. Organizations are vertical. They're vertical for a reason. And there's some implications to that verticalness, if there's such a word.
Right. And we can argue all day long about whether power should exist. Somebody came up to me recently, I want to say it was London, and said, I really have a problem with the whole power thing. And I just don't think it's good. I'm like, well, okay, but found your own country and found a company within that country where there's no vertical structure, and then wonder why people don't do what you tell them to do, right?
Good luck with that.
Yeah. But the fact is there are some behaviors that are reserved in organizations for those people who have more power, more authority, more responsibility than others. It's just, right.
So what about our listeners who would say, I wouldn't want to work for a boss who wasn't open to feedback?
If that's the standard they want to apply to their career search, I think it's a dumb standard. And I'm telling you now, folks, if that's what you want, that's a dumb standard because it really limits the world. Yeah. And if you say to yourself, I want to be in this industry, in a particular industry, and a boss that truly is open to feedback, you're talking about 20 people, maybe, right? At the level you're at. Remember, I mean, everybody, you can't say, well, the only person in my industry who's truly open to feedback is an EVP of sales, and you're an engineer at level 1, I'm sorry, you're not going to go to work for the EVP of sales of this company that's truly open to it. But look, the simple fact is you wanting to work for a boss who is open to feedback doesn't mean that your boss is that guy. Okay? The only solution to the idea that you wouldn't want to work for a boss who isn't open to feedback, if your boss isn't that guy, is either to quit or give all the feedback you want and trust or hope or pray or guess that he won't get tired of it. And the fact is, we're telling you, we've been around the block. We're 50 plus years old. We've seen it happen over our last 30 years of career. And we just know that the average boss, 90% of the time, is not going to tolerate that. Right. Now, and let me say something else. It doesn't make her bad. It just doesn't. It's a function of organizational structure, and it's not a democracy. And yes, there's a growing movement in the world about organizations should be democratic. Got to tell you, going to go away sooner or later. I'm sure I'll get emails about it, right? But look, if you want to hope and pray and trust and guess that your boss is that guy and that he won't get upset about it, fine. But look, I know this is going to sound harsh, but we are trying to give you a sense of how strongly we feel about this. Don't come crying to us if you have an outcome you're not pleased with. After we tell you, don't do it, and then you go ahead and do it. We had a guy, I want to say it was in the last year or two, a young man wrote in and said, hey, listen, I need to know how to handle this situation. This situation come up. And I really think I should do X. What do you think? And both Wendy and I agreed, no, you shouldn't do that. It wasn't about giving feedback to your boss. Don't do that. We don't recommend that. That's going to be bad. And then he wrote back and he said, well, I disagree with you. So what I'm hoping I can convince you to do is, you guys are really clever. You're really smart. You understand how these things work. I know you disagree with it, but give me the words you would use anyway if you were going to actually recommend it. And I wrote back a very short note. And it was borderline curt. I'm sorry, I don't tell people how to do things that I don't recommend that they do. Right? I just don't. And look, if you give feedback to your boss, I don't know how much more strident we can be. And look, I think you're right. 5 years ago, I would have soapboxed this, right? Yeah, right. I would have ranted about it. I'm not ranting now. I'm just telling you guys, we care about you. Even for those of you overseas that we're never going to meet, we care about what happens. I just finished a conference recently, and I said to the group, I worry about what somebody who's listening to us for the first time at 2 o'clock in the morning who doesn't know us, I worry about what they're going to do with our ideas. And it worries me that we make recommendations that their careers are going to hinge upon. And that's why we're so careful about what we recommend. So look, if you give feedback to your boss after we've been as clear and as concise, well, not concise, sorry, that's not one of my strengths. We're being as clear and we're beating this horse to death. But if you don't get an outcome you're pleased with, we're probably going to commiserate with you. We will. We'll say, oh, we're sorry that happened. We're sorry that your boss hammered you. We're sorry that he took you off the promotion list. And guys, I'm just going to tell you, what I'll be thinking while I'm commiserating with you is, I told you so, you fool. Okay? Yeah. Just don't do it. And look, if you want to do it, fine. Go ahead, do it. Just don't come crying to us. And don't tell us later that because your boss didn't punish you in a visible way, that you got away with it. Because I promise you, there are plenty of bosses who go, really? And then think to themselves, okay, -1 in terms of that guy's smarts about organizational power and politics. Right. They're going to say, hey, thanks, appreciate the input. They're not going to change their behavior, and they're going to give you -1 in political skills. And they're going to say to you at the end of the year, stunned that you suggested I should change the way I do X, when in fact you've never been in this job and you don't know what the pressures are.
It goes quickly downhill. Well, there's probably people listening to us right now, managers who have people working for them. They want feedback from their directs. They feel they want feedback, right? So they're little. There's some cognitive dissonance going on here because saying, wait, I'm a boss. I'm like other bosses, and I want feedback from my folks, and I can probably convince them to give it.
Yeah, you're right. I'm going to try to convince my people that I'm genuinely open to comments or suggestions. But frankly, guys, here's how strongly we feel about this. We hope you don't do that.
Right. We hope you're not successful in convincing them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and frankly, we hope you don't even try. You put your directs in an awkward situation. Look, let's do the thought experiment now.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so it's a play with 3 actors. You, one of your directs, and your boss. So therefore, you're in the middle, right? And so you could say it's your boss and you, who's a direct to your boss, and one of your bosses skips, who's one of your directs.
Easy. I always feel like I'm in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. You are. You're a good performer, folks. You are. We're going to give you that. You're a good performer. And, okay, fine. You have good reviews from your boss, your current boss, that say that you're a good performer.
As you're liking the scenario so far, it's only downhill from here. You're a good performer with good reviews, and the rest of it,
but things are going to go bad really fast, right? And your direct in this scenario is one of your better folks. Not your best guy, but solid, good performer, okay? So one day, your boss takes you aside and says, look, layoffs are coming, dude. Just a heads up. We're going to have to cut some folks. Not sure where. Maybe some from your team, maybe not. Don't know. You've got a good team, so maybe you won't lose anybody. And he says, of course, as is always the case with conversations about future organizational structure, this is completely confidential. I trust there will be no leaks.
The same thing his boss said to him. But
that's right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And totally cool. Nothing wrong there. That's a completely normal organizational event. So later that day, the direct we're talking about, you've got a number of directs, but the one we mentioned before, one of your better performers, but not your best, makes a mistake in a meeting. He makes a recommendation using some data that is dated, right? It's out of date, essentially. You know the newer data he didn't use in his presentation is less helpful to the point he's making. That said, you don't think he's fudging. You just think he didn't update that particular slide.
Right.
And so, therefore...
It's just an error.
It's just an error, right?
As opposed to lying or an ethical thing.
And so, look, you decide to give him some feedback, right? So, later that day, you run him in the hallway. And you say, hey, can I share something with you? And he says, sure, go ahead. And you say, when you use old data in the briefing deck, it takes away from the impact you're trying to make. Can you change that for next time?
No big deal.
Yeah, right? I mean, that's
simple,
pretty standard stuff. This is the Manager Jules Feedback Model 101. He pauses a little bit, and then he says he will, right? All good. What you would have expected, right? Now, some people out there are like, wow, that's really direct or really Look, folks, we've spent a lot of time developing the Manager Jules Feedback Model. If you don't like our feedback model, that's fine, but you're going to hear it a bunch more if you continue to listen to us for years and years and years, okay? Hour later, this direct comes by your cube and basically says, you got a second? And sure, you say, okay, fine. And he launches right in very politely. He says, can I give you some feedback? And you're an open, approachable boss, but your eyebrows have gone up mentally or physically. And you say, yeah, okay. He continues. When you give me negative feedback, when there are rumors about layoffs, it really shakes me up. Can you do that differently in the days ahead? So now, Mr. Manager who can I give my boss feedback? Right? He's giving you feedback. What do you say? Perfectly reasonable from his perspective. He doesn't want to be shaken up. You want him productive. But he says you giving him negative feedback during this time makes that less likely. So therefore, he's asking for you to respect the fact that he's nervous and negative feedback would be bad. And so therefore, you shouldn't give him negative feedback. The question becomes at this moment, can you agree? I hope there's nobody who would disagree with our statement. Of course you can't agree that, because things are difficult right now or because there's rumors of layoffs, I won't give you any negative feedback because I'm afraid the negative feedback will cause you to panic in such a way that you won't do any good work at all, right? Look, first, he may need it to avoid making a big mistake later. If he presents that same deck without the feedback you gave to his boss, to your boss, right? And by the way, during a time of layoff, if he gave that presentation with old data and your boss is smart, he knows that's old data. Oh my gosh. Of course you got to give the feedback.
You're going to knowingly let him go in the ditch?
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Exactly.
No.
So exactly. You have to keep him out of a ditch. And two, certainly you can't just stop for now, which essentially would lend credence to the rumor about layoffs and the existence of which you're obligated to protect anyway.
Right.
Okay? But even as you say that, right? Would you be okay with this direct saying, right, you've decided, hey, obviously I can't agree with what this direct is asking, but how would you feel if your direct said, of course I can't do what it is you're asking relative to changing the deck?
That's nonsensical.
Yeah, you can't do that. Would you be okay with if your direct said she was going to write your performance review and insist your boss use what your direct wrote?
I don't think so.
No. Yeah, see, I'm a little more strident about that. Mike says he doesn't think so. I know so.
What? Yeah. When I say I don't think so, I mean
never in a billion years.
No.
Right? Yeah. Would you be okay if your direct said to you, here's what your raise is going to be?
No, unless it was a really big one.
Right. Would you be okay if your direct said to you, no, we're not using your agenda for your staff meeting. We're using my agenda for the staff meeting.
Right. No.
Would you be okay if your direct, whom you had picked for a project, said, no, I've decided you're going to do that project, not me?
No, I would not.
Would you be okay with doing all of your direct's work for him or her? Would you be okay with them doing all of your work?
No, I don't think so.
And the fact is, your answers to these questions, folks, listening to you, we know what you agreed with every single answer Mike gave. You agree with this. Your direct cannot give you feedback because of the power differential in your roles. There are certain things that are held to your level that are not given to your directs. It's a function of organizational power. And look, if you say to your direct, okay, I won't give you any negative feedback, you're literally going to watch him potentially go into the ditch at a time of layoffs. What's more, you essentially, as I said, you give credence to the idea that there are layoffs, so therefore I'm going to give you a little bit of leeway. By the same token, if your direct says, actually, I want to use the same data, would anyone tolerate that? No, I don't think there's a person in the world that would tolerate that. Now, I know some of you are going to write in and say, I have a situation where I could see where I would tolerate my direct saying, no, I'm not going to change that. And okay, we can hear them, send them along. We'll be happy to slay them one by one. The simple fact is some things are reserved for bosses. The CEO gets to decide the strategy. You don't. You don't get to tell your boss how he or she should run things, and your direct should not as well. And this goes down to we're talking about an individual instance, and your directs don't have the authority. And I'll tell you what, I don't know that we've said it. We may have alluded to it a few minutes ago. I'll tell you what most bosses, most people listening right now to this cast would say if one of their directs gave them feedback. They'd say yes, because they thought they think they'd be modeling good behavior.
I think they should, right?
Right? And then the direct will say, when you do that, it's a problem for me. Can you change that? And I promise you the bosses would immediately say, well, I don't think you understand. You don't understand. This is what's going on. And so
if you were more experienced, if you were in my position, had my experience, you'd understand that what you said is really stupid. Right. You may not say it like that, but that's how it comes across to this.
Right, exactly. Sure. And if you're going to do that, and you wanted your direct to give you feedback, by definition, you have to allow your direct to say to you, no, sorry, not going to change that, not going to do it. I'm going to come in late. You've been giving me feedback, but I'm late. I don't care. I'm going to come in late, and so on. Unless you're willing to unleash the possibility that we're really not going to insist on high performance by communicating when people do well or do poorly, unless you're willing to allow your directs to direct you, then by definition, you have to agree. Your directs can't be giving you feedback. And hopefully you understand by extension, that means you can't give your boss feedback because he or she's going to respond the same way that you would. It's a saying I've said for years, and I think people laugh at it. Hopefully in all humor, the point of this one is in all humor there's truth, which is tell your boss the truth, folks, and the truth will set you free. And I've seen it happen too many times. People say, and my boss says he's open to it, and they give it to him, and the boss just hammers them. It's a lesson I learned, so don't do it.
This is probably overkill, right? I mean, we beat this thing. Look, we're not trying to be
fearful.
Dead horse.
No.
We're just fearful of people doing the wrong thing.
Of listening for the loophole. We're trying to cover every possible angle so nobody finds the loophole.
Yeah, and we've seen people do this and get their butt in a lot of hot water and or get fired. We've seen it so many times. These are the things that keep us awake at night.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody would listen to our feedback model, go use it with their boss, and get themselves fired. It's an awful. You don't want to put yourself in that situation.
The manager tools feedback model is written specifically for bosses. It is not a universal construct. It's not a professional norm. Okay, that happens among all professionals as if we're all somehow egalitarianly equal. Right. Here at Manager Tools, we believe the vast majority of poor management isn't solved by tearing down the structures that aren't going to get torn down anyway. We're not here to tell you that democracy is a better way. We're Horstman's Ninth Law, embrace reality, okay? And your organization is a vertical structure. Lots of folks want to decry the structures that exist and say, we should. Oh, I hate that. When it comes to management, folks, when you start saying should, you're on a slippery slope. And if we're in an argument about something, if we're debating something and you use the word should, you're done. I can slay you in that argument. People say we should be more this way or better by being like this or like that. And our answer to that is, folks, dream on. Humans want some verticality in their organizational life. Wish all you want for a flat democratic workplace, but live in the real world with the understanding that there is hierarchical power. And by the way, before you get angry at us, remember something here, folks. We're the ones always talking about the 3 types of power: role power, relationship power, and expertise power. And our favorite here at Manager Tools and at Career Tools, the best one, the most powerful type of power, the one that you really can leverage, the one that you really will make a difference long-term in your career, is not the role power we're talking about here, but rather relationship power. We're not going to say, because we believe relationship power is the most important, that therefore somehow role power doesn't exist or should not exist. Just because relationship power is better doesn't mean that role power isn't always there, because it is. And you have to be cognizant of that when you behave in the political realm that exists in organizational life.
Yeah.
And I know young people say, I want my boss to do it, and so I'm going to teach him to get feedback by giving it to him. Really? I'm going to teach this lion not to eat humans by putting my head in his mouth. Okay. I mean, I don't know if I've ever told this story. My parents went on safari a number of years ago to Africa. And it was kind of a high-end safari where they went out in nice tents and got cooked for and so on, out in the Serengeti or something. And the night before they went out on safari, out in I think Land Rovers or Land Cruisers or something, out onto the plain to see the lions and tigers and bears. Oh my!
This is not the video thing, is it?
Yeah, it's the video thing. And they got shown a safety video. They got shown a safety video. And the safety video was this guy talking, a ranger talking. You got to be careful. Here's what to look for. If a rhino charges, do this or do that or whatever else. And at the very end, it changed and it showed a home video on the video. And what it showed was clearly some man holding a video camera, a home video camera, standing or sitting inside his Land Cruiser, videotaping a lion sitting about 50 feet away, sleeping, laying in the grass, sleeping. A male lion, the classic vision of a lion, big ruff around his neck and so on. And the guy gets out and says, look, there's a lion sleeping, right? And this is part of the safety video. And he says, isn't it awesome? And it zooms in and zooms out, kind of grainy, and everything. And then he goes, let's see what it's really like. It's sleeping. And he puts his camera, you can tell he takes the camera away from his eye and is kind of jumpy for a minute. And then he sets it on the hood of the Land Cruiser and checks to see that it's actually on the lion. And then you see him walking out toward the lion to get a picture of him with the lion on his video camera. And the lion wakes up and mauls him and kills him. And that's the safety video. This is not a zoo, right? And folks, if you think you can teach your boss not to eat you when you put your head in his mouth, now, is there a boss that is that way? Yes, there is. And I'd be willing to bet my life you don't work for him. It's as simple as that. And we love you enough, guys, to be willing to have you guys say, nah, that's really not the case, simply because the vast majority of the time it is the case, and we don't want to get you in trouble. Simple.
Yeah. Many bosses would like to be able to get feedback from their folks, right? And they'll tell you they want feedback.
Yeah.
And we're suggesting, don't believe them.
Don't believe them. Well, let's be clear. They do want feedback, though. That's technically true.
They want feedback.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
They'd like to feel themselves mature enough and respectful enough and
they want
considerate enough to take it.
Let's put it this way. This is not something you and I have talked about before, but let's put it this way. They want to be the kind of person who can accept feedback from directs.
We all want that.
Yeah.
But very few of us measure up to it.
Yeah.
It's not...
And most of you who are listening think you do.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And you have to get some feedback from a direct when it's wacky or when it's dumb or when it's clearly myopic in some way. And then, remember now, your model of feedback when you give to directs, if you know Manager Tools, is if you ask them to change their behavior, you're expecting them to say yes. If you really believe that, then when your directs give you feedback, you're going to have to say yes. Otherwise, you're going to start saying, thank you for the feedback, I appreciate it, and here's why I can't do that. And if you start doing that, that's a model you have to assume your directs are going to follow as well. And that's a breakdown you don't want.
Yeah.
So what we're saying here is don't believe it when your boss says it's okay, right? Again, we talked about the horror stories, and you don't have to go to the video of the lion to mention the horror stories. Bosses ask for input of the direct, and oh my gosh. But frankly, I have to say, I know it sounds really cynical, but look, you may be able to put the spin of cynicism on it, but that doesn't make it any less true. In my experience, many of the bosses most likely to ask for input are the ones who will handle it the worst. And I'll just tell you, if you believe your boss, it's because that's part of what you want. And he's acting or she's acting as if that's part of what they want. But it's the response that matters. And the response is almost always bad. And it doesn't have to be forceful. It doesn't have to be the lion eating you. But there's a little tick mark. Wow.
Yeah. Even if you're going to ask for feedback and to react negatively, it's just don't ask in the first place.
And
right?
to be clear, folks, if your boss has any suggestions about how we can run this meeting better, that's not feedback. A suggestion about how to run the meeting better? Oh, I have a suggestion. Could we try starting a half hour later? Just a suggestion. That's different, folks. Suggestion. Hey, anybody got any ideas about how we can make our presentation better for the CEO? Well, maybe we could put that slide in front of that slide. Now we're talking about ideas. We're not talking about
personal behavior, right?
Behavior and performance around that behavior. Absolutely. Suggestions, if your boss says, let's brainstorm, and your boss says, I think we should do X, it's totally okay in a brainstorm to say, I think we should do the opposite of X, right? As long as you believe your boss is totally open to that. That we're okay with. If your boss says, let's put out some ideas about how we might be able to attack this problem. When your boss says, stupidly, right at the beginning, I think we should do X. By the way, if your boss asks for input and then immediately the first thing he says is, I think we should do X, you should probably just nod your head and say X.
Just think
right?
about it.
But if your boss says, I'm open to ideas, and then he or she doesn't talk for 2 or 3 minutes, that really probably means they are open to ideas. And that's okay. That's not feedback. That's input. That's suggestions. And that may be, hey, can we change X versus Y? That's totally normal. It's not feedback.
Or an after-action report, right? You do some kind of event and you go through a kind of start, stop, continue kind of thing, or whatever. Right? That's not feedback. That's not. When we talk about feedback, we mean feedback in the Manning Tools feedback model, the 4-step process.
Right.
Okay. So we talk about feedback, but closely related to feedback, not feedback. Let's talk about 360s. I think we need to kind of reprise to that point because we've given some feedback we've given some suggestions in the past about how to handle 360s.
Which people could hear as, well, look, if I'm asked to give 360 feedback to my boss, isn't that feedback?
Right.
And the answer is no, not in our definition, because when we say feedback, we mean it's, hey, when you do X, here's what happens. Can you change that in the event that it's negative feedback? And by the way, for those of you thinking, what about positive feedback to your boss? Again, we don't recommend positive feedback to your boss. We just recommend saying, that was great, or well done, boss. You just gave me praise. I appreciate it. Thanks, right? But you don't use the model. You certainly don't ask first, right? Yeah, so let's talk about 360s for a minute. What do you do? I mean, just let's compare this guidance here with 360s. In our 360-degree guidance that we gave, it's been 4 or 5 years ago, I think, our primary guidance to everyone was to minimize your risk. We knew then, and it's still true today, that upwards input, talking about, giving ideas, making suggestions about your boss is fraught with danger. It just is, folks. We wish it were not so, but until it isn't so, we stand by our risk avoidance recommendations. And people ask us about that all the time when they haven't heard the podcast. And I get emails all the time from people saying, I listened to 360. Thank you so much. I didn't make the writing comments. I maybe ding my boss a little bit in this area, but he has 12 directs, so he's not going to be able to find that I was the one that gave him a 2. Specifically, what we said in the cast is you cannot be totally candid if total candor would appear to your boss to be a significant negative. No, you could mention negatives, but never in the written comments, and only when you're protected by the triumvirate, we said, right, of is the 360 regular? It's not a one-off. Is it done externally? In other words, there really is an external validation that's going to guarantee that it's not just some crony in HR saying, I can tell you who said that about you.
Right, exactly.
That happens, guys. If HR is telling you, and please, nothing against HR here, but it happens. HR says, yeah, we're running it. We're doing 360, but you can trust us.
And then the boss comes up to HR and says, who said this? And the HR general says, well, Joe said that.
Well, I probably shouldn't tell you, but yeah, it was your one bad guy, right? You're done.
There you go.
You're done, man. And if the boss is smart, they're not going to tell you HR told me. They're just going to know. And your relationship, you're going to wonder why your relationship with your boss changed. And your boss knows why it changed.
And you don't.
You're done.
Yep.
Yeah. The other thing is anonymous, right? And look, if there are only 3 people that report to your boss and the other 2 do real well, and you think they're going to give your boss a 5, and your boss scores on a particular thing, let's see, a 4, an answer of a 4, the only way you can get a 4 average, 4.0, from 3 people scoring you on a 1 to 5 scale is either a 5, a 4, and a 3, or 3 4s, or 2 5s and a 2.
Yeah. And if one of the persons is his best friend, and the other one is a great performer, that perfect performer, and it's you left and you gave the 2,
you're dumb. I mean, I'm sorry, guys, don't do it. Now you might think, but wait, they're asking me to be honest. No, they're asking you to be smart honest, and they're not asking you. They're giving you a tool that suggests that you could actually speak truth to power. But if the tool only captures 3 people, you can't speak truth to power because the tool assumes you will be guaranteed anonymity. But I got to tell you, the single most frequent thing I've heard from managers when we go over written portions of 360s, and I'm not talking about big external ones. We've mentioned before about the executive who got one from Center for Creative Leadership, and there were 17 areas, and he was in the top 5% in 16 of them, and one he was in the top 20%, and he immediately wanted to talk to that one about his weakness. I'm like, dude, you're a superstar. Don't worry about this one. But the average person doing a 360, the moment they get it, they look for the negatives, and they start looking at the written comments that are negative, and the first thing they say is they point to one of them and goes, I know who said that.
Absolutely. They can be made up completely in their head.
Yeah.
But they absolutely know. In their mind, they know who said it.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And if you think that they're not reading the tone of the words and the vocabulary, you're smoking crack, my friend, because they are. Now, you could say, gee, Mark, that's terrible. Yeah, but Mike and I love you enough to tell you what part of the world is terrible and how to avoid it. Hey, by the way, that's a swamp over there. Don't go driving in it. That's not good, right? I'm not going to blow smoke.
There shouldn't be a swamp there.
Yeah, that's right. There shouldn't be a swamp. So you go ahead. Go right on and see what happens. Right. Yeah. So look. Our guidance there correlates perfectly with not giving feedback to your boss. Now, a 360 isn't feedback. At best, a 360 are suggestions, and hypothetically, they're anonymous. And of course, feedback isn't anonymous. But the whole point of not giving feedback to your boss is along the theme of minimizing risk. Can you mention negatives about your boss in a 360? If you listen to that cast, we say, yeah, only numerically though, not in writing. And only numerically if in fact you know there are going to be enough scores that you really will have anonymity. And there are times when they're not. And if HR is doing it internally and they say, oh, the 3 of you, it'll be fine if there's 3 of you, that's anonymity. No, it's not, guys. 3 is not enough. So, yeah. Now, you didn't ask, but I assume we want to talk about start, stop, and continue, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So look, we stand by the guidance in start, stop, and continue as well. Remember now, folks, that was our guidance to you as a manager, okay? We have no problem with you begging for input or suggestions from your directs, okay? We encourage it. We wouldn't have put out that cast if we didn't. But again, that's you and your directs, not you and your boss. And I think, Mike, have we talked about it before that we want to put this cast out in the Career Tools feed as well?
Yes.
Right? This is a special cast we're going to do in Career Tools as well.
Right.
Because this is part of the manager's career, right? Working with his or her boss, right? So, folks, if your directs came to us and said, can I trust my boss in this start, stop, and continue thing? We would urge them to use caution the same way we would urge them to use caution in a 360, even if we knew the boss they were giving feedback to. Even if it was a good friend of ours who we think of highly and ethical and compassionate and a good boss and a high performer, we'd still say, no, be careful. And the reason why? Because we know managers. And we know that even the best of us can be shocked into frustration and maybe even anger with some of the things that directs think they ought to be able to suggest that we should change.
That's right.
Right. I think people could use an absurd argument and say, oh, you guys are implying that bosses are kings and we can't speak. No, we're not. We're just aware of the power that bosses have, and we're aware that many bosses are insecure and many bosses overly use their role power, and we don't want that to happen to you.
As a manager, I consider myself fairly mature. I've been around a while. I'm pretty open to feedback. And there have been times when I've been gotten feedback from directs, and I think about my reaction, and I wasn't pleased with my reaction. It was not useful. And I consider myself pretty good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it was a reaction, right?
It was a reaction.
Yeah.
Right? If somebody gives you feedback and you react, and then you have to go back to your direct later and apologize, It's just not good.
Yeah, there are people at conferences who come up to me and say, Mark, can I give you some feedback? And I say, no, you're not my boss. And they're miffed because of that whole equality thing, right? Both sides. If you give me feedback, well, then, of course, I said to them, I never gave you feedback. You don't work for me. They're like, oh, yeah. I said, now, if you want to make a suggestion about something or you want to praise me for something, that's fine. I'm open to that.
Yeah, that's not feedback.
Yeah, it's not feedback, right. The common response of most managers to suggestions or recommendations from directs about specific managerial behaviors is a subtle attack on the direct's lack of understanding of the factors in the decision. Now, we alluded to this earlier. But if a direct were to say, you don't understand the factors in my decision after you gave them feedback, well, most managers would say they probably think they know enough to be able to give the feedback that they give.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, long cast, folks. And yet, so important. We've said it 100 times, and yet we wanted to codify it officially. Never give feedback to your boss. Don't use our model. This is not the Direct Tools model. We have a whole slew of Career Tools casts designed to make you more effective with your boss, and it doesn't include the Manager Tools direct feedback to boss model. Don't believe it when they say it's okay. Just trust us there. There are rare bosses for which they really mean it, but it's like roulette, man. It's not red or black. It's like the one green slot is that boss, and you don't work for him or her. And then, of course, remember what we said about 360s and about start, stop, and continue. Look, folks, simply put, we'd all like all systems in the world to be perfectly reciprocal, but they're not. Giving feedback to your boss isn't wise, and we will say this until the end of time.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
You bet.
All righty. Thanks, everyone. That's it. We'll see you next week. Have a great one. So long.